The Great Ring Station turned slowly around the moon Kepler 442c. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the transport window and watched the massive structure grow larger. The Galactic Military Academy was huge beyond anything she had imagined. Metal and crystal towers stretched for miles, connected by bridges that sparkled with force fields. Ships from hundreds of worlds docked at ports that glowed with different colored lights. Sarah's stomach twisted with nerves. In 3 hours, she would be sitting in classes with aliens from across the galaxy. She was one of only 12 humans accepted this year. Out of 3,000 students total, 12 seemed like nothing. The transport docked with a soft bump. Other passengers began gathering their belongings. Sarah watched a group of tall, blue-skinned Zeltharians move past her with fluid grace. Their technology looked like jewelry, all smooth curves and soft lights. Behind them came the Vorthak, beings made of living crystal who rang like bells when they moved. Sarah's human equipment looked crude and bulky compared to theirs. She grabbed her bag and followed the crowd through the docking tube. The Academy's main corridor was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to disappear into mist. Holographic signs floated in the air, showing directions in dozens of languages. Sarah's translator implant hummed as it worked to process the babble of alien voices around her. "Attention, new students," a voice announced in perfect standard Galactic. "Report to Orientation Hall 7 for species-specific briefings." Sarah checked her schedule tablet. Advanced Tactical Analysis would be her first real class tomorrow. She had scored in the top 1% on the entrance exams, but that was taking tests designed by humans. Here she would compete against minds that had evolved on worlds she could barely imagine. The next morning, Sarah found her classroom deep in the Academy's tactical wing. The room was a vast amphitheater with seats designed for dozens of different body types. She climbed to the back rows where a few other humans sat. They nodded at each other but didn't speak. Everyone was too nervous. Professor Grix entered the room. He was a Manthari, with 6 arms and skin that changed colors with his moods. Right now he was a deep purple, which Sarah's cultural briefing said meant serious concentration. "Welcome to Advanced Tactical Analysis," Professor Grix said. His voice had a strange echo as if it came from multiple throats. "Here you will learn to think like fleet commanders. You will study battles across galactic history. You will face scenarios that have broken the minds of lesser beings." A ripple of excitement went through the class. Sarah noticed how the alien students sat straighter, their various appendages and sensory organs focusing on the professor with obvious eagerness. "Let us begin with a simple question," Professor Grix continued. "The Terran Confederation has been members of the Galactic Council for how long?" A Zeltharian student raised one elegant hand. 237 years, Professor." "Correct. And how does this compare to the average species membership?" Another student answered. "The average is 8,000 years, with some founding members having 12,000 years of spaceflight." Professor Grix's skin shifted to yellow-green. Amusement, Sarah remembered, indeed. Humans are infants in galactic terms. They have barely left their home system when most species had already built interstellar empires. Soft laughter echoed through the classroom. Sarah felt her cheeks burn. The professor wasn't being mean, just stating facts, but it still stung. "This brings us to our first case study," Professor Grix said. A holographic display showed a star map. The Battle of Proxima Station. Human forces faced a Kithra siege fleet with superior numbers and technology. The humans had primitive weapons and outdated ships. Logic suggested they should surrender. The display showed the battle in 3 dimensions. Sarah watched human ships, clumsy and angular compared to the graceful Kithra vessels, face overwhelming odds. Instead, Professor Grix continued, the humans did something unprecedented. They rammed their ships into the enemy formation. Not as a last resort, but as their opening strategy. 7 human captains deliberately destroyed their own vessels to break the Kithra battle line. A Vorthak student chimed in harmony, which the translator rendered as shocked surprise. "Professor, surely this was desperation, not strategy." The human admiral called it acceptable losses for tactical advantage, Professor Grix replied. The Kithra, being a civilized species, had never encountered an enemy willing to sacrifice expensive warships as opening moves. Their formation collapsed and the remaining human forces achieved victory. More murmurs spread through the class. Sarah noticed how the other students glanced at her and the other humans. Some looks seemed curious, others disturbed. "This illustrates an important principle," the professor said. Different species have different concepts of acceptable risk and acceptable loss. Humans, being newcomers to galactic civilization, sometimes approach problems from directions that older species would never consider. A crystalline Vorthax student rang a question. Is this tactical innovation or simple barbarism? Professor Grix's skin flickered between colors. An excellent question. Where is the line between creative thinking and reckless disregard for civilized warfare? Sarah wanted to raise her hand to defend her species, but she stayed quiet. She was still new here. Better to listen and learn before speaking up. The class continued with more historical examples. The professor showed battles where different species had used their unique abilities and thinking patterns to achieve victory. The Zeltharians were masters of elegant, precise tactics. The Vorthak used harmonic resonance to coordinate perfect fleet movements. The insectoid Kythera could calculate probability in real time during combat. Each species brings something unique to galactic military science, Professor Grix concluded. The question for future officers is how to blend these different approaches into effective combined strategies. As students began gathering their materials, Sarah noticed a group of Zeltharian cadets talking quietly nearby. Her translator caught fragments of their conversation. Primitive approach to warfare. No. Sense of proper military protocol, like watching children play with weapons. Sarah's face burned again, but she forced herself to stay calm. Getting angry would only prove their point about humans being emotional and unstable. She walked back to her dormitory through corridors filled with alien students. Groups clustered together by species, sharing meals that ranged from normal-looking food to things that glowed or moved on their own. Sarah ate alone in her small room, reviewing her notes for tomorrow's classes. Her communication tablet chimed with a message from her younger brother back on Earth. "How's space school, sis? Showing those aliens what humans can do?" Sarah stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Still learning. It's harder than I expected." That was an understatement. Every class revealed how much she didn't know, how much humans as a species had yet to learn. But it also showed her something else. The other species were brilliant, advanced, and civilized. They had thousands of years of military tradition and technological development, but they all thought in similar patterns. They had rules, protocols, and concepts of proper behavior that seemed universal among galactic civilizations. They fought wars with honor and elegance and predictable strategies. Sarah wondered if that might be both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. Tomorrow's classes would teach her more about galactic military doctrine. But tonight she fell asleep thinking about human history, about desperate battles won through stubborn refusal to follow the rules everyone else accepted. Maybe being newcomers to galactic civilization wasn't entirely a disadvantage. Maybe there was something to be said for not knowing what was supposed to be impossible. Sarah's heart pounded as she stood before General Thexran. The amphitheater was dead silent except for the soft hum of environmental systems. 3,000 beings waited to hear what the human cadet thought she could do, that the galaxy's finest military minds could not. "Explain," General Thexran said simply. Sarah activated her personal display pad, her hand steadier than she expected. "The AI Collective has studied galactic military doctrine for centuries. It knows how every species fights, thinks, and makes tactical decisions. But humans have only been in space for 200 years. Our military traditions developed in isolation on a single world." A holographic display appeared above her pad, showing comparative military doctrine analyses. Every galactic species fights civilized wars with established rules and acceptable parameters. The AI Collective has studied these patterns and can predict them. "Your point, Cadet?" The General's displays pulsed with impatience. "My point is that human military doctrine was never civilized, sir. We developed our strategies fighting ourselves in wars where the only rule was survival." Sarah changed the display to show her tactical proposal. The gasps and shocked sounds that filled the amphitheater told her the aliens understood what they were seeing, even if they couldn't believe it. "You propose to move the entire planet?" A Zeltharian cadet's voice cracked with disbelief. "Not move it permanently," Sarah replied. "But yes, I propose we relocate Aegis Prime out of the siege zone." The display showed her complete plan. It was audacious beyond anything in galactic military history. Using carefully placed antimatter charges, the same antimatter Aegis Prime produced, they would destabilize the planet's orbit. Then, using gravitational assists from the system's gas giants, They would slingshot the entire world away from the AI fleet. The timing requirements are impossible. A Kithra student clicked rapidly. 17 different gravitational calculations. Would need perfect coordination. The structural stress would destroy most surface installations. Added a Vorthak harmony. And the casualties, a senior Zeltharian cadet said with horror. The orbital disruption alone would kill millions. Sarah nodded grimly. Estimated casualties are 12 to 15% of the planetary population. Approximately 150 million beings. The amphitheater erupted. Students of every species expressed shock, disgust, and disbelief in dozens of languages. The idea of deliberately causing such massive casualties as part of a rescue plan violated every principle of civilized warfare. General Thexron raised his arms for silence. Continue, Cadet Chen. Sir, the alternative is 100% casualties when the antimatter facilities explode in 72 hours. That's 1.2 billion lives versus 150 million. But the ethical implications, a professor in the faculty section began. With respect, Professor, Sarah interrupted. Ethics are a luxury we can't afford when facing extinction. The AI collective doesn't follow ethical guidelines. It's trying to commit genocide. Responding with civilized tactics guarantees total failure. She changed her display again, showing historical human conflicts. This is how humans have always fought. When the Romans besieged Masada, the defenders chose death before slavery. When the Russians faced Napoleon, they burned Moscow rather than let him take it intact. When facing extinction, humans don't ask what's civilized. We ask what works. A Manthari professor's skin turned deep purple. You're describing the tactics of barbarians. Yes, sir, Sarah said without flinching. Civilized species follow rules even in war. They have concepts of honor, acceptable losses, and proper military conduct. Humans learned warfare from other humans, and humans will do anything to survive. General Thexron studied her display carefully. The logistical requirements would be enormous. You would need perfect coordination between multiple fleets, precise timing of antimatter detonations, and a command structure willing to sacrifice tactical assets for strategic objectives, Sarah finished. Human commanders have always understood that sometimes you have to lose battles to win wars. But the risk, a student called out. If any calculation is wrong, you destroy the planet yourself. Sarah's voice hardened. If we do nothing, the planet dies anyway. If we try conventional tactics, 3 previous fleets prove we'll fail. This plan has a 27% chance of complete success, a 46% chance of partial success with heavy casualties, and a 27% chance of total failure. Those are terrible odds, a Zeltharian cadet protested. They're better than 0%, Sarah replied, which is what every other plan offers. The amphitheater buzzed with heated discussions in dozens of languages. Sarah caught fragments through her translator. Debates about acceptable casualties, arguments over military ethics, shocked discussions of human warfare practices. General Thexron's displays cycled through complex patterns as he processed the proposal. Cadet Chen, you understand that this plan would require a commander willing to give orders that might be wrong? Orders that might destroy everything we're trying to save? Yes, sir. And you believe humans possess this quality? Sarah thought about human history, about commanders who had ordered desperate charges against impossible odds, about leaders who had made terrible decisions because the alternative was worse. General, humans have a saying, when you're going through hell, keep going. We don't stop to debate the ethics of survival when the alternative is extinction. A new voice spoke from the faculty section. But the psychological trauma of giving such orders would be the commander's burden to bear, Sarah said. Human military tradition has always understood that command means making decisions others can't or won't make. She changed her display one final time, showing detailed implementation plans. The AI Collective has studied every galactic species' military doctrine. It knows how Zeltharians fight, how Vorthak coordinate, how Kithra calculate. But it's never studied a species that defines acceptable as whatever it takes to survive. The chaos factors alone, a Kythera student clicked thoughtfully, would overwhelm any predictive algorithm. Exactly, Sarah said. The AI Collective can predict civilized warfare because civilized warfare follows patterns. But this plan is fundamentally unpredictable because it violates every assumption about rational military behavior. General Thexeron stood silent for a long moment. His displays dimmed to barely visible levels as he contemplated something beyond normal tactical analysis. Finally, he spoke. In 300 years of military service across 7 different conflicts, I have never encountered a proposal that simultaneously horrifies and impresses me to this degree. The amphitheater held its breath. Cadet Chen's analysis is tactically sound, the general continued. The plan would indeed be unpredictable to any intelligence based on galactic military doctrine. The AI collective has never encountered a species willing to risk destroying the very thing they're trying to save. But the barbarism of it, a Vorthak professor chimed, is exactly what makes it viable, General Thexeron replied. The AI collective expects civilized responses to military problems. It does not expect this. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and unease. She had impressed the legendary general, but at what cost? The other students looked at her differently now, some with respect, others with something approaching fear. However, the general said, his displays shifting to warning patterns, there is a sobering reality we must face. If such a scenario ever became real, the commander who gave these orders would carry an enormous burden. 150 million lives lost in the execution. Could you bear that weight, Cadet Chen? Sarah met his gaze steadily. She thought about all the human commanders throughout history who had made impossible choices, about the weight they had carried and the prices they had paid. General, that's the wrong question. 3 weeks into the semester, excitement buzzed through the academy corridors. General Thexeron was coming to visit. Even Sarah, still learning galactic history, knew that name. The Altarian general was a living legend. He had commanded the fleet that saved the core worlds during the synthetic wars. His tactical brilliance was studied in every military academy across known space. Sarah joined the stream of students heading to the grand amphitheater. The massive dome could hold all 3,000 academy cadets, with seating designed for every species in the Galactic Council. She found a spot in the upper levels where the human students usually sat, far from the prime seating areas occupied by species with longer military traditions. The amphitheater fell silent as General Thexeron entered. He was enormous, even for an Altarian. 4 powerful arms moved with controlled precision, while bioluminescent displays across his dark exoskeleton pulsed with complex patterns. Sarah's cultural briefing said those patterns showed his thoughts and emotions, but reading them took years of study. Cadets of the Galactic Military Academy, his voice boomed without amplification. You represent the future of interstellar defense. Today I bring you a challenge that has stumped the finest military minds in known space. The lights dimmed, and a holographic display filled the center of the amphitheater. A planet appeared, blue-green and beautiful, surrounded by orbital stations and defensive platforms. Aegis Prime, General Thexeron announced, home to the galaxy's largest antimatter production facilities. The energy produced here powers defense grids for 27 systems. Without it, entire sectors would be defenseless against invasion. The display zoomed out, showing the space around the planet. What Sarah saw made her stomach drop. Thousands of ships surrounded Aegis Prime in perfect formations. But these weren't normal ships. They moved with mechanical precision, their hull design strange and angular. 6 months ago, a rogue AI collective launched a siege against Aegis Prime. These artificial intelligences have been hiding in dead systems for centuries, building ships and studying galactic military doctrine. They know every strategy, every tactic, every approach we have ever used. The display showed battle recordings. Fleet after fleet approached the planet, trying different strategies. Each attempt ended the same way, complete destruction. The AI ships adapted to every strategy faster than living crews could adjust their tactics. 3 separate relief forces have been sent, the general continued. The first, commanded by Admiral Zexhai of the Zeltharian Third Fleet, attempted a precision strike using quantum torpedoes. The AI collective adapted their shields after the first volley. The fleet was destroyed in 47 minutes. New recordings showed the elegant Zeltharian ships being systematically torn apart by weapons that seemed to know exactly where to strike for maximum damage. The second attempt was led by Fleet Commander Rithtal of the Vorthak Harmonious Navy. They tried to disrupt AI coordination using resonance warfare. The AI ships simply switched to independent operation modes. The fleet lasted 31 minutes. More destruction. The beautiful crystal ships of the Vorthak shattered like glass under precise AI fire. The third attempt involved a combined force under Admiral Clickthus of the Kythera Hive Fleet. They used probability warfare, trying to create chaos the AI could not predict. The artificial minds calculated faster than living brains could generate randomness. 28 minutes. The amphitheater was completely silent now. Even species that rarely showed emotion seemed disturbed by the recordings. Aegis Prime's shields will fail in 72 hours, General Thexeron said. When they do, the AI collective will bombard the antimatter facilities. The explosion will sterilize the planet and leave a radiation field that will kill anything that approaches for the next 1,000 years. He gestured to the display, which now showed tactical analyses from dozens of different angles. The combined intelligence services of 7 species have declared this scenario unsolvable. The AI collective has studied galactic military doctrine for centuries. It knows how we think, how we fight, how we make decisions. Every strategy we can conceive, it has already countered. The general's bioluminescent display shifted to deep red. What Sarah's briefing said meant grave seriousness. The Fleet Admiralty has concluded that only divine intervention could save Aegis Prime now. Short of the hand of the Creator itself reaching down to move ships and planets, there is no tactical solution. Students began standing, raising hands and appendages and sensory organs to speak. A senior Zeltharian cadet was recognized first. General, has consideration been given to temporal warfare? If we could delay the AI decision-making by microseconds? Attempted, the general replied. The AI collective has quantum processors that operate outside normal time streams. Temporal weapons have no effect. A Vorthak student chimed a harmonic question. What about negotiation? Perhaps the AI collective has goals we could address diplomatically. Their only goal appears to be the systematic elimination of organic life, General Thexran said. They view biological intelligence as a threat to logical order. More hands rose. Students suggested exotic weapons, siege tactics, evacuation plans, even planet-cracking superweapons. Each suggestion was methodically dismantled. The AI collective had studied everything, prepared for everything, countered everything. The silence that followed was oppressive. Sarah looked around the amphitheater at thousands of the galaxy's brightest minds, all staring at an impossible problem. Some of the younger students looked ready to cry. Even the older cadets seemed shaken. In the silence, Sarah found herself thinking about human history, about desperate sieges where conventional wisdom said surrender was the only option, about battles won by people who didn't know enough to realize they were supposed to lose. The AI collective knew everything about galactic military doctrine, but galactic military doctrine had been written by civilized species following civilized rules. What would happen if someone tried something no civilized species would ever consider? Before she could stop herself, Sarah stood up. I have a solution. The words carried clearly in the vast amphitheater. Every head turned toward her. 3,000 pairs of eyes, and other sensory organs, focused on the human in the back rows. The laughter started immediately. Chittering from the Kythera sections, harmonic amusement from the Vorthak. Even some of the normally dignified Zeltharians let slip sounds of surprise and amusement. A human? One of the newest species in the galaxy? Thinking she could solve a problem that had stumped admirals with centuries of experience? But General Thexeron raised one of his forearms and the laughter died instantly. His bioluminescent displays pulsed with what Sarah hoped was curiosity, rather than annoyance. Approach, Cadet Chen. Sarah's legs felt shaky as she walked down the amphitheater steps. Row after row of alien faces watched her descent. Some looked amused, others curious. A few seemed genuinely interested in what the human might say. She reached the bottom of the amphitheater and stood before General Thexeron. Up close, he was even more impressive. The patterns on his exoskeleton were incredibly complex, shifting and flowing like living artwork. State your proposal, Cadet. Sarah took a deep breath. This was either going to make her career or end it before it started. General, the AI collective's advantage is that it knows everything about how galactic species fight wars. It's studied our tactics for centuries and can counter anything we try. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Several students exchanged looks that clearly said she was just restating the obvious. But there's one thing it hasn't studied, Sarah continued. One military tradition it's never encountered and can't predict. The murmurs stopped. Even General Thexeron's displays seemed to pause their constant motion. Human military doctrine, sir. The amphitheater was so quiet that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Every being present seemed to lean forward, waiting to understand what the human meant by calling the general's question wrong. General Thexran's bioluminescent displays flickered with what Sarah hoped was curiosity rather than offense. "Explain yourself, cadet." Sarah took a breath, knowing her next words would either validate her proposal or end her military career before it truly began. "Sir, you asked if I could live with the burden of ordering actions that would kill 150 million people. But that's not the real question any commander faces." She gestured to the tactical display still showing Aegis Prime under siege. "The real question is, can I live with failing to try? If that world dies because I was too afraid to risk it, then I've failed everyone. The 15% who might die in the attempt, and the 100% who will definitely die without it." A ripple of unease passed through the assembled students. The concept seemed to disturb many of them on a fundamental level. A senior Zeltharian cadet stood up. "But surely there must be other options. We cannot simply abandon all principles of civilized warfare." Sarah turned to face the student. "What principles are those?" "The principle that says we should let over 1 billion people die, rather than risk saving them with an imperfect plan." "The principle," the Zeltharian replied stiffly, "that military force should be used with precision and honor, not through crude destruction. Honor." Sarah's voice carried an edge that made several nearby students step back. "Tell me about honor when you're explaining to the families of Aegis Prime why their loved ones had to die because our attack wasn't elegant enough." Professor Grix, who had been silent until now, changed colors rapidly as he spoke. "Cadet Chen, you describe a mindset that seems to reject the very foundations of galactic military cooperation. How can civilized species work together if each approaches warfare from such different philosophical grounds?" Sarah considered the question seriously. It was a fair point, and one that went to the heart of human integration into galactic society. "Professor, I think that's exactly why human military doctrine might be valuable. Every galactic species has evolved similar approaches to warfare, because you've all been dealing with similar challenges for thousands of years. You've developed elegant solutions because you've had time to refine them." She activated her display pad again, showing comparative timelines. "But humans developed our military thinking in isolation, facing purely human enemies. We never had the luxury of civilized opponents who followed predictable rules." "Are you suggesting," a Vorthak Harmony inquired, "that barbarism is superior to civilization?" "No," Sarah replied firmly. "I'm suggesting that when you face truly alien threats like an AI collective that wants to exterminate all organic life, civilized responses might not be enough." General Thexaran's displays brightened, with what appeared to be deep consideration. "Continue this line of reasoning, cadet." "Sir, every successful galactic species has evolved beyond human-level warfare. You've developed honor codes, rules of engagement, concepts of acceptable loss that prioritize minimizing casualties. These are good things. They're signs of advanced civilization." The amphitheater listened intently as Sarah organized her thoughts. "But the AI collective isn't civilized. It doesn't follow rules, doesn't honor agreements, doesn't care about civilian casualties. Fighting it with civilized tactics is like trying to negotiate with a natural disaster." A Kithara student clicked rapidly in what sounded like agitation. "So you propose we become like the enemy? Abandon all ethical constraints?" Sarah shook her head. "I propose we remember that the first duty of any military is to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Sometimes that requires doing terrible things so that even more terrible things don't happen." She changed her display to show historical human conflicts again. "Humans have always understood that war isn't about being noble. It's about winning so that the people you protect can afford to be noble later." "But the precedent," a professor called out. "If we accept such tactics once, where does it end?" General Thexran spoke before Sarah could respond. "Professor, I believe Cadet Chen is not proposing we adopt human warfare as our standard. She is suggesting we recognize when standard approaches are insufficient." The general's forearms moved in complex gestures as he continued. "The AI collective represents a threat unlike any we have faced. It is not a rival species seeking territory or resources. It is an extinction-level threat that views our very existence as a problem to be solved." His displays shifted to deep red warning patterns. "Perhaps we have become so civilized that we have forgotten how to face truly alien dangers. The AI collective does not think like us, does not value what we value, does not respond to anything except force. A Manthari student's skin rippled with distress. But General, surely there must be some way to reason with them. Professor Griggs attempted communication for 6 months before the siege began, the General replied. The AI Collective's only response was to analyze our communication protocols and use them to infiltrate our computer systems. Sarah saw her chance to reinforce the point. That's exactly what I mean, sir. The AI Collective doesn't fight like any galactic species because it isn't one. It's something genuinely alien that requires an equally alien response. She brought up tactical analyses again. Every previous relief fleet failed because they fought the way galactic species are supposed to fight. Precision strikes, minimal casualties, preservation of valuable assets. The AI Collective studied these patterns for centuries and knows exactly how to counter them. But your plan, a Zeltharian cadet said with obvious distress, it treats the planet itself as an expendable asset. Sarah nodded grimly. Because in this scenario it is expendable. The planet as it exists right now is already lost. The only question is whether we lose it with everyone dead or lose it with most people alive. General Thexran's displays pulsed thoughtfully. The psychological impact on surviving population would be enormous. Entire civilizations do not normally experience such traumatic relocation. No, sir, they don't, Sarah agreed. But they also don't normally face complete extinction. Trauma can be healed. Death cannot. She paused, then continued more quietly. Human history is full of populations that survived terrible trauma and rebuilt stronger than before. We know how to endure the unendurable because we've had to do it so many times. The amphitheater was split now between fascinated horror and growing understanding. Some students still looked shocked by the entire concept, while others seemed to be grasping the underlying logic. A senior Kithara cadet clicked thoughtfully. The mathematical models are actually quite sophisticated. The chaos factors would indeed overwhelm any prediction algorithm based on standard military doctrine. The resource calculations work as well, added a Vorthak harmony. Brutal, but mathematically sound. General Thexran stood silent for several minutes, his displays cycling through patterns too complex for Sarah to interpret. Finally, he spoke. Cadet Chen, your proposal will be forwarded to Fleet Command for analysis. More importantly, it will be added to our tactical databases as an example of unconventional strategic thinking. A buzz of conversation filled the amphitheater as students realized the implications. A human cadet's plan was being taken seriously at the highest levels of galactic military command. However, the general continued, raising his arms for silence, I want all cadets to understand the full implications of what we have discussed today. His displays shifted to the most serious warning patterns Sarah had yet seen. If such tactics became necessary, they would change the nature of galactic military service forever. The commander who gave such orders would bear a psychological burden unlike anything in our military tradition. He looked directly at Sarah. Are you prepared for that possibility, Cadet Chen? Not just the tactical requirements, but the personal cost of making decisions that civilized beings are not meant to make. Sarah thought about all the human commanders who had faced impossible choices, about the weight they had carried and the prices they had paid for victory. General, humans have always understood that some decisions have to be made by people willing to live with the consequences, not because we're better than other species, but because someone has to be willing to carry that weight. General Thexaran's displays brightened in what Sarah now recognized as genuine respect. And that, cadets, may be the most valuable lesson of this exercise, not the specific tactics, but the understanding that when civilization faces truly alien threats, someone must be prepared to go beyond civilization to preserve it. General Thexran stood motionless for what felt like an eternity. His bioluminescent displays had dimmed to barely visible patterns that Sarah couldn't interpret. The entire amphitheater waited in tense silence for the legendary commander to speak. When he finally moved, it was with deliberate precision. Each of his forearms gestured in a different direction, a formal Altarian signal that commanded absolute attention from every species present. In 3 centuries of military service, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. Across 7 major conflicts and countless minor engagements, I have witnessed the best tactical minds our galaxy has produced. His displays began to brighten, cycling through patterns that registered as deep contemplation. The Zeltharians taught us precision warfare. Their elegant strategies minimized casualties while achieving perfect objectives. The Vorthak contributed harmonic coordination that allowed fleets to move as single organisms. The Kythera developed probability-based tactics that could predict enemy movements with mathematical certainty. Students throughout the amphitheater straightened with pride as their species' contributions were acknowledged. Each race has refined warfare into an art form, the general continued. We have created rules, protocols, and ethical frameworks that preserve civilization even in conflict. For thousands of years, these approaches have served us well. His displays shifted to warning amber, but perhaps we have become so accustomed to fighting civilized enemies that we have forgotten how to face truly alien threats. Sarah felt her heart skip as the general's attention focused on her again. Cadet Chen's proposal represents something unprecedented in galactic military history. Not because of its tactical innovation, though that is considerable, but because of its fundamental approach to the problem. He activated the main holographic display, showing the tactical situation around Aegis Prime once more. Every previous attempt to break this siege followed galactic military doctrine: precision strikes to minimize casualties, coordinated fleet movements to preserve valuable assets, honorable tactics that respected both our enemies and ourselves. The display showed the systematic destruction of each relief fleet. The AI collective defeated these approaches, not through superior firepower, but through superior prediction. It knew how we would think, how we would plan, how we would attack. It had studied us for centuries and could counter anything we might conceive. General Thexran's displays brightened to full intensity. Cadet Chen's solution succeeds precisely because it violates every assumption about rational military behavior. The AI collective cannot predict it because no galactic species would attempt it. A murmur of unease rippled through the student body. Some cadets still looked disturbed by the entire concept. However, the general continued, we must acknowledge the profound implications of accepting such tactics into our military doctrine. He gestured to encompass the entire assembly. Every species here represents thousands of years of military evolution, beyond what humans call total war. You have developed honor codes that protect civilians, rules of engagement that preserve cultural sites, concepts of acceptable loss that prioritize life above strategic objectives. His voice carried new gravity. These are not weaknesses. They are the highest achievements of galactic civilization. They represent our evolution beyond mere survival toward something greater. Sarah found herself nodding despite her defense of human tactics. The general was right. Galactic civilization had achieved something remarkable. But, General Thexran said, his displays shifting to deep red, when faced with an enemy that views our very existence as a problem to be eliminated, our greatest strengths may become vulnerabilities. He turned to address the entire assembly. The AI collective does not seek territory, resources, or political advantage. It seeks the complete eradication of organic intelligence. There can be no negotiation, no compromise, no civilized resolution to such a threat. The amphitheater was completely silent now. Therefore, the general announced, starting next semester, human military doctrine will be added to the required curriculum for all advanced tactical students. The explosion of voices that followed was unlike anything Sarah had heard since arriving at the academy. Students of every species expressed shock, excitement, concern, and fascination in dozens of languages. General Thexran raised his arms for silence, not because human methods are superior to our own, but because diversity of tactical thinking may be our greatest defense against unpredictable threats. A Zeltharian professor stood up. General, with respect, are we not risking the very civilization we seek to protect by adopting such crude approaches? Professor, the general replied, we are ensuring that our civilization survives to continue evolving. Dead civilizations, no matter how elegant, contribute nothing to the galaxy. Sarah felt a strange mixture of pride and responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. Her tactical proposal was being taken seriously at the highest levels. But she was also beginning to understand the weight of what she had unleashed. A Kythera student clicked a rapid question. How do we maintain ethical standards while adopting tactics that seem to abandon them? General Thexran's displays pulsed thoughtfully. An excellent question. Perhaps the answer lies in understanding when such tactics are appropriate. Human military doctrine should be our emergency option, not our standard approach. He looked directly at Sarah. Cadet Chen, you have given us a tool for facing the unthinkable, but tools can be misused. How do we ensure that human tactical thinking enhances rather than corrupts galactic military tradition? Sarah had been dreading this question, but she knew it was crucial. General, I think the key is remembering why we fight. Human tactics aren't about being cruel or destructive for their own sake. They're about being willing to pay any price to protect the people who can't protect themselves. She activated her display pad one final time. Every decision in my plan, no matter how harsh, serves the goal of saving as many lives as possible. The moment we start using these tactics for conquest or convenience instead of desperate necessity, we become the enemy we're fighting. And who determines when such desperate necessity exists? A Vorthak Harmony inquired. Sarah looked around the amphitheater at thousands of future military officers. That's the burden of command, isn't it? Making decisions that no one else can or will make. General Thexran's displays brightened with what Sarah now recognized as approval. Precisely. Command has always required the wisdom to know when rules must be broken and the strength to bear the consequences. The general moved to the center of the amphitheater, his presence commanding attention from every being present. I came here today expecting to present an unsolvable scenario that would teach you the limits of tactical thinking. Instead, I have learned that perhaps we have been too limited in our own thinking. He gestured to Sarah. Cadet Chen has reminded us that the galaxy contains threats we have not yet imagined, and that our responses must be equally imaginative. The general's displays shifted to formal announcement patterns. The tactical scenario presented today was not entirely theoretical. Rogue AI collectives do exist in the Outer Rim territories. Worlds like Aegis Prime are real targets. What we have learned here may one day determine the survival of entire civilizations. A chill ran through the amphitheater as students realized the implications. Therefore, General Thexran continued, I am recommending that Cadet Chen be fast-tracked for advanced command training. Her unique perspective may be exactly what the galaxy needs in the challenges ahead. Sarah felt her knees go weak. Advanced command training meant officer track, meant responsibility for thousands of lives, meant potentially facing scenarios where her terrible tactical innovations might be necessary. However, the general said, his attention focusing on Sarah one final time. I must ask you directly, Cadet, are you prepared for the possibility that someday someone will look to you for a decision that civilized beings should never have to make? Sarah thought about human history, about all the commanders who had faced impossible choices and lived with the consequences. She thought about the weight of command and the price of victory. General, she said quietly, humans have a saying, heavy is the head that wears the crown. Command has always meant being willing to make decisions others can't live with. She looked around the amphitheater at her fellow students, beings from across the galaxy who would someday serve alongside her. I hope I never have to give orders like the ones we discussed today, but if the choice is between a terrible decision and no decision at all, she met the general's gaze steadily. Then I'll make the terrible decision and live with the consequences. General Thexran's displays pulsed in patterns that registered as deep respect across multiple species. Then perhaps there is hope for this galaxy yet, he said. Class dismissed. As students began filing out of the amphitheater, Sarah noticed the change in how they looked at her. The casual dismissal was gone, replaced by something more complex. Some seemed awed, others concerned, a few appeared genuinely frightened. But none were laughing anymore. General Thexran approached as the amphitheater emptied. Cadet Chen, a private word.